Hey everyone, Lex here yet again, and today I present you my final update for the Avatar of Fire shield wall build on the Smith of Kitava, at least for this league. I'll definitely be iterating on this one down the line because I absolutely love where this build has progressed to, and I've gotten so much positive feedback from you guys who enjoyed my previous video. Thank you so much for that, by the way, despite, you know, GGG nerfing the Black Flame Ring and gutting that interaction with our ignites. But it didn't matter because we're still 1 to 2 shotting pinnacles with some really strong ignites and clearing all endgame activities. At this point, I think I've been playing what has been my strongest version of a shield warrior build. I mean, the clear is now insane, the bossing is insane, the survivability is insane. It's just absolutely so strong on every front, and it feels amazing. So let's get into the video. We're going to start with the biggest changes from the previous version of the build, and then move on to more of the specific stuff like skill gems, the passive skill tree, gear, and all that stuff as usual. But I'll also be providing you with some alternative options and ways you could potentially improve the setup down the line, or with some luck. So let's get into it. Alright guys, we're going to go over the biggest changes from the previous video and where the build is at now. The biggest difference here is our method of clearing, which is way better than before, but honestly bossing has pretty much remained the same, so we'll do a quicker recap there. Anyways, as you've noticed from the clips by now, yes, we are utilizing the On Citadel and Kaom's Madness combo made popular by our Lord and Savior Kaom. Thanks for the passive skill tree point, by the way, it honestly helped a lot. But yeah, basically these two support gems can turn our shield wall into our main clearing ability. A lot of you were asking about this, and at this point I think I should stop coping and trying to make Fortifying Cry the main clearing ability. This just feels a lot better and is basically what I switched to once I realized I needed a little extra juice for clearing 200% delirium. However, one of the big downsides to using Kaom's Madness is the massive drain on your skill speed, a whopping 20% less. So to make up for this, you obviously have to stack a lot of skill speed on the passive skill tree and through your gear. I do think that this is likely the best way to go about clearing at this point, but I wanted to offer a couple of alternatives if you don't like using Kaom's or are having trouble stacking skill speed, especially at slightly lower levels or if you're on a little bit of a budget. The first one is what I'll call the sawed-off method. It's just regular old shield wall, and you just detonate it with Fortifying Cry over and over again. The forward-facing AoE is actually quite good, and you'll likely be dealing a lot more damage, just in a more concentrated area. The second is, honestly, you could try just using On Citadel and not Kaom's Madness. This will turn your shield wall into a single fissure that shoots straight out from where your character is facing, and as you detonate it with Fortifying Cry, the explosion shoots out evenly from either side of the wall from what I can tell. Effectively has the same positive effect as Kaom's by turning your shield wall into more of a ranged ability, and I was honestly surprised at how well this worked without Kaom's. Again, it's nice not having to deal with 20% less skill speed, you'll just have to be slapping down more shield walls and being a little more accurate with their placement. But yeah, using whatever method you choose, you'll be able to clear absolutely all content in the game, simulacrums, grand expeditions, 200% juice deli maps. They honestly feel kinda relaxing at this point. There is very little risk of dying on this character as long as you're paying a little bit of attention. But we're basically just spamming shield walls in our second weapon set with Nebulok so that they are always critically striking, and then we're detonating them with Fortifying Cry. Some of you remember the previous version of the build where Fortifying Cry was our main way to clear. It's not really our main way anymore, but it still hits really, really hard, and I use it as a mop-up tool if there are any enemies nearby that a shield wall has missed, or if there's just like a group of 3 mobs that I don't feel like slapping down a whole shield wall for. But yeah, I mean, these shield walls and their subsequent ignites are going to be wiping most monsters very far in the direction you are facing. We also have a bunch of endurance charge generation from both the passive skill tree, some sockets on our gear, and our amulet anointment, but also now from Magma Barrier, which I slapped back on this build as it is a pretty legit endurance charge generator. I find that this often goes off when I am channeling Resonating Shield between shield walls, which I usually do when I'm positioning or repositioning myself for a juicy explosion. We'll go over this in the passive skill tree and gearing sections of the video, but we are also using Constricting Command. Most of you know how this works by now, but we're basically getting a ton of offensive, defensive, and utility bonuses from this thing. And with how this works, we only need one enemy to be in range for us to be considered surrounded, so sometimes if there is a weak mob that's slapping me, I'll just let them tag along so that these surrounded bonuses are always active. But as another interesting addition, we are also using the Sacred Flame Shrine Scepter, which is actually taking care of our fire resistance issues for enemies in our presence. This means we no longer need to waste a support gem slot socketed with Fire Penetration 2 to bypass fire resistance, and this scepter also gives us a bunch of spirit as well. Really like the switch to this item since we don't really need a strong Mason weapon set 1 anymore. Nebulok is now our clearing and bossing weapon, so everything is feeling a lot more optimized. And I mean, that's basically it for clearing. When it comes to bossing, as I said earlier, the story is mostly the same, though very importantly, we want to swap out on Citadel and Kaom's Madness for Elemental Armament 2 and Scouring Flame. It is very important to do this. You could probably fight Pinnacles if you wanted without swapping the gems, but it'd just take a bit longer while we can basically one-shot bosses or boss phases with the latter setup. But yeah, when you're in a boss fight, we just spam Resonating Shield until the boss's armor is fully broken, having built up some rage in the process. Then we use Sunder to inflict the Sundered Armor debuff, which is also increasing our fire damage due to the Molten One's gift notable on the passive skill tree. Then we just Infernal Cry, Shield Wall, Fortifying Cry, slam down another Shield Wall and Fortifying Cry if you need to, but that's basically it. The boss will take a ton of damage and will likely just burn to death from the Ignite if you wanted to just play it safe and be defensive, one of the big advantages of inflicting a hardcore damaging ailment. That's all there really is to it. Individual Shield Walls can hit for like 9 million or more damage with the Ignite included, big part of the reason why I like Avatar of Fire. And the clearing feels legitimately good. I don't know if I'd call it meta, but it's nice to see that the on Citadel and Kaom's Madness combo is still going strong. And that's basically it for clearing and bossing, y'all. Real quick, there will be a Mobalytics link to the build below in a new tab called 0.5 Avatar of Fire plus Nebulock Optimized. Please refer to that as you need, as there are some finer details to consider when looking at the support gems and weapon sets and stuff like that, which is honestly really satisfying. We're going to go into why weapon sets are so beneficial to this build in the skill gems portion of this video, which we'll talk about now. All right, let's talk about the skill gems, starting with the one that does it all, Shield Wall. So this is obviously the clearing setup as we talked about earlier, and this is always set to weapon set 2. Very important. But yeah, let's go over the supports real quick. So as we touched upon earlier, on Citadel is the lineage support gem that turns your shield wall into a fissure that shoots straight out from your character in kind of like a vertical line rather than a perpendicular one that's horizontal right in front of your character. This basically turns shield wall into more of a ranged attack ability. It's really useful. And then we have Kaom's Madness, which makes this even better by creating 3 additional fissures at the cost of some downsides here. You can see 20% less damage, kind of, you know, whatever. Supported skills have 20% less skill speed, that's the worst one. And then the supported skills have 30% less area of effect, but that last one honestly kind of doesn't matter because these 3 additional fissures cover so much area of effect anyway that you're benefiting from more area of effect because you're creating a total of 4 fissures every time you shield wall at this point. But yeah, again, the skill speed is easily the worst one out of the bunch. You have to make up for that somehow through the passive skill tree, through your gear, etc. But it is totally worth it because the fissures are super efficient at clearing. Like, they will creep through doorways and up ramps and stuff like that. It feels really good using this combo for clearing, so I definitely recommend it. Just as a quick note for your clearing, I've noticed this before, but your shield walls actually deal some damage as they are being created. And when using Kaom's Madness, this is a lot easier to pull off, and you can actually deal some significant damage to mobs, if not outright wipe them while the fissures are forming. Interesting tech here that makes me wait for the fissures to finish forming before detonating them, just to like double dip in some damage here. The forming damage is definitely not as much as the detonate damage, but it is still significant, and I have actually blasted down some rares while the walls are forming, and they're also taking things into account like more damage based on being empowered and critting. Again, very interesting tech, so try it out, but let's go back and finish up the support gems. And the rest is pretty straightforward. We have Fire Attunement, which is just helping us gain some damage as extra fire damage. Obviously useful for this build. Super Critical, which is really useful here because we are always critting with shield wall. We're consuming an endurance charge with Nebulock in this weapon set to guarantee critical hits as long as we have an endurance charge to consume. So Super Critical is making this hit crazy hard and makes it really good for clearing, since again, these 2 support gems here are making it cover so much ground. So you're just covering a ton of ground and critically hitting with each shield wall at this point, and it feels really, really good. And then lastly, we have Rapid Attacks too, and this is simply to make up for Kaom's Madness. We want more attack speed where we can get it, and a support gem here is useful for that purpose. If you are somehow able to stack a ton of attack speed elsewhere, you could maybe swap this out for more AoE with Magnified Area or more damage with like Elemental Armament or something, etc. So this is just here for now. Oh, and real quick, let's go over the bossing setup because we want to swap out these 2 lineage support gems for these 2 support gems down here. We have Scouring Flame and Elemental Armament. It's a little annoying to have to swap them every boss fight, but honestly, it becomes like muscle memory at some point and doesn't take a lot of time. So, you know, just one of the things we have to deal with as shield warriors. But yeah, to go over these real quick, we have Scouring Flame, which gives us a crazy amount of ignite magnitude, a whopping 50% at the cost of increasing the skill's cost by a little bit of runic ward. It's like like based on how much life and mana cost it is. So you have to tack on a little bit of extra runic ward cost to this, but it's honestly so negligible with how we're set up. So you will pretty much never like run into a runic ward barrier. You'll always have enough to cast a skill during a boss fight, and they're going to die in like 1 to 2 shield walls anyway usually. So really useful because this will just burn their health down in case you have to walk around, or if you just want to play defensive for a bit. The ignites do crazy damage with shield walls, so again, I highly recommend trying it out if you haven't yet, and I'm definitely going to be sticking with this. And then last one is elemental armament. Very simple. It's just more elemental attack damage. Super straightforward. We just want more damage against bosses, and this is allowing us to just nuke them down super quickly. And next up we have Fortifying Cry, which is our main detonator for shield wall. So every time you cast a shield wall, you're going to be casting Fortifying Cry to detonate them like 99% of the time, and it is basically socketed in a way to both increase its damage and its utility. And just as a quick side note, GGG actually nerfed the Fortifying Cry shield wall combo with this most recent league. Basically, Fortifying Cry was shooting out multiple shield waves every time you would detonate it with shield wall, which would overlap and deal multiple instances of damage, which is just crazy. It would deal tons of single target damage, honestly, which we're still doing, but they decided to nerf that interaction so that shield wall detonations now only consume 1 empowered attack from Fortifying Cry, and you can only damage enemies with 1 shield wave at a time. No matter how many hit them, they can only take damage from 1 shield wave. But I noticed that Kaom's Madness shield walls, when detonated with Fortifying Cry, don't sap up just 1 empowered shield wave. They actually sap up 4 to 5. So I'm wondering if like the extra fissures are consuming more of the empowered attacks that you get from Fortifying Cry, but I don't think they are overlapping and dealing more than 1 instance of shield wave damage to the mobs that you're hitting. It's getting kind of complicated here, but I noticed that, and I guess it's kind of unfortunate if they aren't taking overlapping damage, because you're still sapping up more shield waves than when you use a standard shield wall, which only saps up 1 shield wave when you Fortifying Cry to detonate it. Anyways, just a little weirdness there. I'll get into the support gems. So magnified area to increase its area effect so that we are hitting more things with the shield wave as we're detonating the shield walls. And in case you need to use this to mop some mobs up, this will increase the shield waves because this does hit really hard in a smaller area. Then we have elemental armament 2, simply to just increase its attack damage. Fire attunement, once again, just more damage. And then we have Raging Cry and Enraged War Cry. A lot of you are probably familiar with this combo at this point, but Raging Cry helps us gain rage and maintain rage as we're shouting and clearing things, and Enraged War Cry lets us spend rage to bypass the cooldown. And you know, these they don't completely cancel each other out. It kind of depends on like what you're hitting with the shout as far as how much rage you gain from your targets or from the power of the targets that you hit with it, but it's still a really useful combo. Oh, I just realized I left my inventory open, sorry about that. But one other very important thing about Fortifying Cry is that this is always set to weapon set 1 here, as are most of the other skills, honestly. It's interesting, another weird thing that I noticed is that I was trying this out in the same weapon set as shield wall before, and strangely enough, there's some other weird interaction with the amount of endurance charges that are consumed with Nebulock. For some reason, you will consume 5+ endurance charges with Fortifying Cry and shield wall, like your standard shield wall, not even Kaom's Madness. So I'm not really sure what's going on there, if like each shield wave is consuming an endurance charge to try and crit, even though targets can only be hit by 1 shield wave. Really weird stuff going on with these interactions, to be honest. But yes, moral of the story is keep this to weapon set 1, and you'll see that a lot of the other skills we have here are also set to weapon set 1. Anyways, moving on, we have Resonating Shield next. This is also set to weapon set 1, and we're not spamming it quite as often as before, but it does still see a lot of use, again, as I'm using it to position myself near a bunch of enemies for a juicy shield wall, or if I'm like repositioning between them. I'm still just getting a lot of value out of this by just blocking hit damage in front of me as I'm doing so, and breaking armor, which is going to be useful in a bunch of different ways. But let's just go over the support gems real quick. So first up, we have a lineage support gem called Stern's Mountain. I think I mentioned this before as an option, but wasn't like fully committed to it. I'm now fully committed. I do think it's pretty good. So melee skills that don't raise a shield deal 20% more damage if you've blocked while using supported skills recently, and you get 50% more stun threshold for heavy stuns while you're channeling this, basically. But yeah, I mean, you're getting 20% more damage with all of your other skills, including shield wall, including Fortifying Cry, etc., if you just happen to block an attack while you're channeling Resonating Shield. And that's happening often as you're, again, positioning briefly or repositioning briefly. It's a short period of time, but you're still usually blocking a very simple attack or 2 during that. So this is doing a lot of work for us as far as boosting our damage goes. And then next up, we have Armor Break 3. So this breaks armor equal to 20% of physical damage dealt by supported skill. However, we're not dealing physical damage, we're dealing fire damage. So that part of the support gem is actually useless to us. However, what's very useful is the 20% chance to gain an endurance charge when supported skills fully break armor. We're breaking armor all the time when you are doing those repositions and positioning. You're still breaking a lot of armor, and you will see endurance charges just kind of pop up as you are doing so. And this helps out a lot as far as endurance charge maintenance so that you're keeping those shield walls critting, etc. So very useful support gem here, despite the first part not being relevant to the build. And then the rest I've had socketed before, pretty straightforward. We have mobility, so you're moving faster as you're channeling resonating shield. You have rage 3, which increases your attack speed when you're not full on rage, but also grants you 5 rage on melee hit. Very useful, and this is helping us build rage as we are again clearing and bossing. So very good. Rage again, super strong in this build. Always try to have a lot of rage. And then supported skills break 70% more armor. Pretty straightforward. We want to break more armor with this skill so that we can, take advantage of all of the fully broken armor effects that we have going on this build. Or rather, we can take advantage of them faster since we're breaking more armor with this skill. That's what I mean to say. And then next up is Infernal Cry, also set to weapon set 1, very important. And it's basically socketed in a way for pure utility at this point. First up, we have Tireless, which grants us a 25% chance to not consume an empowered attack granted by the skill when we shield wall, which is really useful because I am using this shout pretty often when clearing, usually when I run into some crazier events like out in the field, like a really high socket rune carving thing, or perhaps like a really juiced abyss pit or something like that. And the rest are pretty straightforward. We have Rage and Cry once again for similar reasons to Fortifying Cry, and Rage War Cry 2, once again similar reasons to Fortifying Cry, just so we're, this is for rage maintenance and bypassing the cooldown if we really need to. And then Efficiency to decrease its cost a little bit, because why not? There's not a whole lot of sockets that are going to be relevant here at this point. And then Fire Mastery, just to make it a little bit more effective and deal a little bit more damage. Just felt like it fit here. And then we have Sunder here, which is set to weapon set 2 because we cannot sunder with our Sacred Flame Scepter. It has to be done with a mace, so that mace is Nebulock, and this does technically mean that it eats up an endurance charge for no reason when we're setting up bosses with the Sundered Armor debuff. But it's fine because we have plenty of endurance charges stocked up for boss fights, and it's literally never been an issue. But it's basically just socketed in a way to increase its attack speed. So we have Rapid Attacks 3 here, which increases its attack speed by 35% at the cost of it dealing 50% less damage. We don't care about the damage at all with the skills. We just want the Sundered Armor debuff up on bosses. So that downside really doesn't matter to us. And then we have Rage 3 here, which gives us 5 rage on melee hit. Kind of whatever, it's fine, it helps. But really it's the 50% increased attack speed while we are not at maximum rage. And during the setup phase of a boss fight, you're usually not at maximum rage, so you're getting another 15% increased attack speed with this gem. It's really nice to just speed it up. And then supported skills have 35% more skill effect duration. This makes the Sundered Armor debuff last longer on bosses, which is what we want. And that's pretty much it. You don't need to fill these other 2 sockets in to increase its cost or anything like that. And then we have Scavenge Plating next here, which gives us a stacking armor buff as we are fully breaking armor. And again, we are getting a bit of value out of Resonating, and you get 10 stacks automatically when you fully break a boss's armor, so perfectly reasonable to have this here. And these sockets are as follows. We have Prolonged Duration 2 for a longer buff time for the stacks of armor you're getting as you fully break armor. Physical Mastery, this only increases, I think, the buff duration time or the thorns damage, I think, or both of those. It doesn't increase the amount of armor that you get per stack or anything. So, I think it's useful. I'll just have it here just to buff it up a little bit. And then Cannibalism 2 and Vitality 2. So these are set to our clearing set, and this is going to be active most of the time. These are really useful, but with the way I have the spirit configured, as we'll go over in a bit, it just makes sense to have them in Scavenge Plating, even though Scavenge Plating is only set to weapon set 1, as you can see here. We're still getting a lot of uptime with this, and when we detonate shield walls, we're still getting the Cannibalism active, since Fortifying Cry is also in weapon set 1, so it just works out very nicely. But yeah, anyways, moving on to Magma Barrier, which is a triggered skill that pops off when you raise your shield with things like Raise Shield or Resonating Shield after it has charged up over 8 seconds. And this is set to both weapon sets so that we don't interrupt the charge up time of the shield, though it will not reset the charge up if you did end up setting this to one weapon set. Like, you can charge up for 4 seconds in one weapon set, and then you swap to the other weapon set, and then when you swap back to the weapon set that Magma Barrier is set to, it will continue charging up where it left off. So it would just charge up for the remaining 4 seconds and then become active instead of starting all the way from 0. And I just felt the need to mention that because I was running Time of Need on this setup for a little bit, and then I realized that Time of Need actually never goes off if you have it set to even to both weapon sets. There's something weird about the weapon set swapping that just never makes the cooldown actually reset. It's very strange, and it's been a bug since, I think, 0.1 potentially. People have been talking about it for a while, and I have no idea why it's not fixed yet. Very strange. I hope they fix it at some point because I would love to use Time of Need as well in this setup, or instead of Scavenge Plating perhaps, because it would be useful to have that active in both sets and just be able to heal continuously. But again, Time of Need active in both sets, it just doesn't work. It's very weird. Please look into it, GGG. But yeah, let's just go over the supports real quick. So we have Charge Profusion 2, which is the most important one here. Supported skills have a 30% chance to grant an additional charge, which is endurance charges. So this gives us endurance charges every time it triggers, and then we have a 30% chance to get an additional one. So we get 2 instead of 1, which is awesome as we are mapping and clearing, etc. This will just queue us up for 2 more critically striking shield walls instead of 1, 30% of the time or whatever. So it's really useful in that way. If you can definitely feel the benefits as you socket this in for the first time if you haven't used it before, so I definitely recommend it. And then supported skills have a 15% chance to grant an additional random charge. We don't really care about that. We're not using frenzy charges or power charges for anything on this build, so that's kind of whatever. And then we have a bunch of sockets that are just aimed at cranking up its damage, like Fire Attunement, again, Elemental Armament 2, Close Combat 2. This thing can hit really hard at close range and can nuke down certain rares for you at times, so it is useful to have the damage on this thing. It hits really hard, even though it's on an 8-second cooldown and is a shadow of its former self. And then we have Eternal Flame here, which is just a longer ignite duration on targets. You could probably swap this out on something else, but we are getting some benefits from hitting ignited targets or burning targets. So I just figure, hey, we might as well have a skill that kind of inflicts a longer duration ignite in case we just need that. And then we have Berserk. This is just more damage from rage at the cost of losing our health over time when our rage is not decaying. But the sockets here are very simple. We have Precision 2 and Strong-Hearted. So Strong-Hearted is basically just a bonus. I had some spare spirit laying around. I just figured, hey, some less shock duration could help our survivability a bit. So this is why this is here. However, Precision 2 is a little bit more important because we want a lot of accuracy since we are covering such a wide AoE with our skills and detonations. We want to make sure that the furthest reaches of our AoE has a 100% chance to hit, and this definitely helps us get there. However, one important thing to note is that Berserk is actually active in both weapon sets, which might be obvious. It's good to have extra damage in, for clearing and bossing. However, a lot of that is because I wanted Precision to be active in both weapon sets as well. Shield Wall, when it's set to a specific weapon set, it has a tendency to snapshot the weapon set it is in before you detonate it, which is why the Nebulock critting works despite swapping the weapon sets all the time here. When you create the Shield Wall, you consume an endurance charge, and that Shield Wall is basically set to crit no matter what weapon set you're in. So why is this relevant here? I noticed that my Shield Wall accuracy was lower when Precision was set in Scavenge Plating, which made Precision only active in weapon set 1. And I don't think I'm going crazy, but making Precision active in both weapon sets improved my clear greatly. I'm pretty sure, so that's why Precision is set to Berserk, which is set to both weapon sets. And yeah, I just basically want to explain my reasoning there. And then lastly, we have Shield Charge. This is actually a newer addition. I was using Leap Slam for the longest time, but since Leap Slam is a mace skill, we can only use it in the Nebulock set, which means that we consume endurance charges as we are jumping to and fro while clearing. And I didn't really want that. I wanted those endurance charges for, critically hitting shield walls. However, shield wall is a perfectly legit traveling ability. Here, I'll actually give you a display real quick. Yeah, as you can see here, shield charge is a very, very quick ability if you have enough attack speed as we do, and you socket it for even more. You can see this is actually faster than sprinting, I believe, at this point. So we want to just, you have no risk of being knocked down either. So this is just a legit way to travel around maps, etc. Kind of useful in that way. However, I don't know if they put this in the patch notes or anything, but you were only able to interrupt shield charge's animation at the very end. Like towards the end there, like before you collide or you did like this weird slowdown animation. But it looks like now you can interrupt shield charge at any point. Do you see this? I'm just spamming raise shield. And I don't think that was the case before. You could only do that with dodge rolling out mid-charge, but now you can use something like raise shield or even a resonating shield to just break the charge. That's actually really useful, which also makes it a pretty legit detonator for shield walls. As you can see here, we don't even have to charge all the way through the shield wall anymore. We can just literally, like if you wanted to, animation cancel every time you blast through a shield wall. Really interesting. I'm going to keep this here for now and play around with it. You don't need to have shield charge here, but I've grown curious upon this realization, and it does feel really good as a travel skill in general, so I'm gonna keep it socketed. Anyways, that's about it for the skill gems. Take a look at the Mobalytics link below for reference, but now we're moving on to the passive skill tree. Alright, as always, we'll start with the mouse over. So this has changed substantially from the previous version of the build. Most notably, we have redistributed the points out of the dedicated warrior part of the tree to pursue a more southern route so that we can prioritize towards grabbing some juicier attack speed and skill speed nodes, as well as cranking up our damage through surrounded nodes via constricting command, and even making rage a lot more valuable to us with Iglottal's Inferno, which we'll go over in a second. Let's start with the Ascendancy, still Smith of Kitava, one that I have absolutely loved playing this league, and you'll notice one big change here. We've actually spec'd 2 points out of Smith's Masterwork and grabbed Forged in Flame up here so that our maximum fire resistance modifiers also apply to maximum cold and lightning resistance. And honestly, as far as survivability goes on Smith, I think this is the easier and more legit option over just pure armor stacking. It feels way better and doesn't require as much commitment as armor stacking does, and Smith is one of the only Ascendancies that can actually hit the 90% elemental resistance cap pretty easily thanks to this node. So this is where I've gone for tankiness, and it helps out so much not having to worry about armor stacking anymore. But yeah, it's business as usual. Aside from that, we have Coal Stoker here, obviously, which makes our fire resistance apply to all other resistances at half its value. Super useful for gearing. And then we have Smith's Masterwork down here. If you don't know how this works, basically your character is locked to only wearing normal rarity body armor, but the trade-off is for some strong defensive bonuses. We have Kitava Engraven down here, which gives us 15% more maximum life, or increased maximum life, which is great for tankiness. We have Leather Bindings over here, also for tankiness, and since we're blood magic, this helps us kind of maintain our life regeneration since we're using life to cast our skills. So we're regenerating 3% of our maximum life per second. And it also cancels out like the berserk degen that we get when we're like full on rage, etc. And then we have Heat Proofing, which grants us body armor, grants us unaffected by damaging ailments. That's super useful. It's probably one of the first nodes I pick when I get Smith's Masterwork. And then we have Molten Symbol, which is what's making that 90% elemental resistance do so much work for us in the physical realm as well, because the body armor grants 25% of physical damage from hits is taken as fire damage, which is great. It's really nice to be able to use your elemental resistances to kind of take care of the physical side of things. And it's been awesome. I've taken some really scary hits, and I'm surprised at how much health that I have like remaining after I've gotten hit by them, and it's due to Molten Symbol. So really big physical damage hits are a lot less scary if you take this. But let's get into the passive skill tree itself, starting again with the Anointment. This is the same one as before. It's called Thaumaturgic Generator. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, but this basically generates endurance charges for you every 5 seconds. Well, it can be any charge, but if you have more strength support gems socketed across your skills, the chances for the endurance charges to generate are a lot higher than if you had them all socketed with something like intelligence support gems, where and then I think you get power charges instead, and then when you have a bunch of dexterity support gems, you get frenzy charges instead, etc. I mean, the usefulness should be obvious here. We're just passively generating endurance charges for our Nebulock crits. This does so much work when when we're clearing with Shield Wall, just because we can rely on this to at least generate endurance charges every 5 seconds. Sometimes you'll randomly get a power charge or frenzy charge, etc., but it's not very often since the vast majority of our support gems are strength support gems. And then we have all the other methods of generating endurance charges on top of that, breaking armor with resonating shield, magma barrier, etc. You will be swimming in endurance charges with this build, and it feels perfectly fine. But yes, we basically path down to this cluster here, which is a bunch of attack speed nodes, increased attack speed, all the way to this notable, which grants us even more attack speed, as well as allies in our presence have increased attack speed. We don't really care about the allies portion, but there aren't many clusters on the tree that have this much attack speed just kind of across 4 points. So just having access to a total of 12% increased attack speed here is really nice, especially for a Kaom's Madness version of Shield Wall. Then we move down here and we grab this little critical damage bonus node, or bonus branch here. We're not heavy stunning things so much, so the extra 25% critical damage bonus here against stunned enemies is not that useful to us, but we still want critical damage bonus where we can grab it on this build. And then we have this really nice string of passives and notables here, where we're getting just fire damage, attack damage, fire damage, attack damage, flammability magnitude, and then Iglottal's Inferno, which I just touched upon. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, this is honestly so strong with this build because not only is Rage giving us 1% more attack damage per stack now, but it is now giving us 1% increased fire damage per stack as well. So at maximum stacks, we have 44% more attack damage and 44% increased fire damage. damage. And that is before the Berserk buff, which is increasing both of these effects by 68%. Very big upgrade to our fire damage here, and it feels great. Then we path down here like before. We're grabbing all these movement speed nodes set to weapon set 1, which is our clearing set. We tend to just spend most of our time in this set anyway, so it makes sense to set these movement speed things to weapon set 1. That's the weapon set we're going to be spending most of our time in when it comes to moving around and repositioning and things like that. But then we have our first little cluster of surrounded nodes here. The small passives leading up to the surrounded nodes are really strong point for point. We have 30% increased armor while surrounded, 25% increased attack damage while surrounded, and it's very easy for us to be qualified as surrounded. So these, again, point for point, these are really strong. And then we have this notable here, which is 20% increased attack speed while surrounded. That is just, that's more than the cluster we just went over, which is 4 passive skill tree points. So you're getting a lot of value out of this 1 passive skill tree point, especially for a Kaom's Madness shield wall build. So this is pretty much essential to grab if you are using Constricting Command on a Kaom's Madness shield wall build. And then we have Paranoia, which just increases the surrounded area of effect. I think as a standard, it is 3 meters. Yeah, so you can see it's 3 meters to be counted as surrounded, but this will increase that radius to 4.5. And it's just important to do that, I think, almost as like a quality of life thing. It's just so that Constricting Command is active earlier, since the radius to be counted as surrounded is wider. So you'll have these nodes, these surrounded nodes, and the other ones we'll go over in a second, to be active more often and earlier when you're clearing. It feels really good to have this, so I definitely recommend it. And then as we go down here, this is mostly the same here. I grabbed some attack speed here, chance to blind, which is fine, and then more attack speed here. So we're getting, I think, another 16% increased attack speed across these 4 passive skill tree points. And the chance to blind is nice. That's kind of like a pseudo survivability thing and accuracy thing, since targets will evade less and hit less when they are blinded. I'm pretty sure that's how that works. And then we have this node here, which increases our AoE, as we went over before, Engineered Blaze. So we're igniting things all the time. You're basically going to get the 40% maximum AoE of this effect active pretty much all the time as you're clearing. However, the most important thing to point out here is that these are no longer weapon set 1 nodes. These are just standard passive skill tree points, because we want all the weapon set 1 stuff to be set to the War Cry stuff, as you'll see in a bit as we go to the other part of the tree. So it just made sense to make these standard passive skill tree points, and the weapon set 2 skill points are being used for ignite and critical damage bonus and stuff like that. So that's why these are now standard passive skill tree points. And then we have 2 weapon set 2 points here, which is just helping our ignites deal more damage. This is mostly for bossing, and it's decent value for these 2 points in my opinion. So I just threw them down here since our ignites are so strong, and we just get them to deal even more damage, or just to deal their damage faster. So it feels really good to have this here for bossing specifically. All right, let's jump all the way back over here where we branched off, and we have this cluster here. Up top we have 2% attack speed, another 6% between these 2 nodes, and then up here we have the notable that gives us 15% increased attack speed if you've been hit recently, which is crazy good. Obviously, again, we want as much attack speed as possible on this build, and we kind of want to get hit so that this is active. And again, we're so tanky, it doesn't matter as much if we're getting hit by things, so we want to get hit by things so that we have this extra 15% increased attack speed. Feels really good when this is going off, and is again why I like to let like sometimes a weaker mob kind of follow me around and tag me, just for the surrounded effects and for this one to be active all the time. Well, not all the time, but more often. All right, so we do have a bunch of new nodes here, but let's start with the time lost diamond here, because I think it's important to go over this, which is why we've kind of shoved a bunch of passive skill tree points in this little cluster here. So as you can see, we have 2 roles, and they're both affecting notables, and it's split between making us tanky through giving us 1% to maximum fire resistance, and gaining 4% of damage as extra fire damage on each notable within the radius here, for a total of 6% to maximum fire resistance and 24% of damage gained as extra fire damage. The important part here is honestly the maximum fire resistance. This not only helps us cap out at 90% max to all resistances here, but we also save so many passive skill tree points in doing so. Really feels efficient to find one of these and place it here, especially with the gain fire damage roll. I think they are running around 9 to 10 div last I checked, so honestly pretty cheap considering the work it is doing for the build here. But yeah, I don't want to spend too much time here. I'm actually going to remove the diamond for now, just so we can read these notables a little bit easier. But yeah, so we'll go over them quickly. We have these useful rage notes. This notable, this is just a bunch of extra rage, therefore extra damage. Again, very important with Berserk and Glottal's Inferno. Then we have these 2 nodes here. This one gives us a bunch of stun threshold per rage, so 2% per increased stun threshold per rage, which again is really useful. I have this set to both weapon sets because we don't want to get stunned when we're slamming down shield walls. I used to, in some builds, I would have these nodes set to weapon set 1 because I was like, hey, weapon set 1 is my clearing set. I don't really need stun threshold in my second weapon set, but here we definitely need it active in both. So this is why these are standard passive skill tree points. And then we have the Molten One's Gift here, and this is not actually in range of the jewel, but that's okay. It is still integral to the build, I'd say, and it's what makes fully armor break or full armor break and sundered armor debuffs applied to fire damage. So definitely take that. And then we have these useful surrounded nodes down here. Again, really strong small passives leading up to them. We have 20% increased armor and evasion while surrounded, 25% increased attack damage, more attack damage. And we have Frantic Fighter here, which is granting us 100% increased attack damage while surrounded at the cost of some accuracy. Again, with the accuracy I've stacked through gear and the precision 2 support gem, we're still hitting 100% of the time at our maximum distance. So it feels really, this is fine. This is just pure attack damage basically. And then we have this one that's basically a defensive one, 30% increased block chance while surrounded. Deflection isn't really relevant to this build, so we don't really care about that. And then the ailment and stun threshold while surrounded, also really useful for slamming down shield walls without being interrupted. And the middle one here is just more movement speed, which is always really nice. More movement speed, sorry, I misspoke there. And then 0.5 meters to dodge roll distance while surrounded, which is really interesting. You don't see that in a lot of places, so it's kind of cool to have this as like a quality of life movement speed node here, I guess. Now all these are in range of that diamond, by the way, so you're getting like the 12% fire damage gained, and then the 3% to maximum fire resistance. Really useful. And this is this like jewel socket is a lot of the reason why I want to go constricting command a lot of the time, because you can get a lot of juice out of time lost jewels with this, considering all the useful and relevant nodes here for a warrior. But yeah, then we have armor, and armor applies to elemental damage nodes here leading up to this notable, which is also in range of the diamond. Tempered defenses, this is just more armor, and more armor applies to elemental damage. This is mostly here for that diamond, just so we get that extra notable and see those benefits. But I do think that you should still stack a bit of armor because it's still useful to us as like a secondary defensive layers. And you could make an argument, honestly, to spec down here. We're not leeching, but you do, if you put these 4 points down from here to here, you do see 5 strength and then 1% increased maximum life and 3% increased maximum life. So you can get 4% increased maximum life and 5 strength down here. And this notable is in range of the diamond as well. So you see the benefits of that notable as well. So, that's another option I just wanted to throw out there. And then we have Warcry stuff here set to weapon set 1. This is mostly for Warcry speed, honestly. But we have this notable here, which is actually giving us 2% maximum life and mana when we are using a Warcry, again, with a bunch of Warcry speed and Warcry cooldown recovery. I mean, all that stuff is really useful. And as is the recovery, we're not like spamming only war cries or anything, so we're not just like continuously recovering our maximum life or anything like that, but we're still using them often enough to see some benefits here. And then we have these 3 points up here, mostly for the notable here. This is just so that we have a maximum of 5 endurance charges rather than 3. It just feels way better to have that 5 maximum so that we're able to crit more frequently while clearing, since we're consuming them somewhat quickly. So it's nice to be able to have more in the bank, basically. And then we have these 3 here for resonating movement speed. You could make an argument to replace these elsewhere because we're not resonating shield quite as often anymore, but I still like them, so I'm keeping them. That's my reasoning. But anyways, we have more familiar territory up here. These are all set to weapon set 1. Again, this is for Warcry utility. The increase, or the empowered attacks deal increased damage is fine. I don't really need that in weapon set 1. However, it's mostly just for the Warcry's empower an additional attack here, just to make our, it's a little bit of a quality of life thing to be able to empower more shield walls with like Infernal Cry, or detonate more of them with a Fortifying Cry with this node if you're stacking a little bit more empowered attacks. So it's mostly just so that we make detonating and charging up our shield walls a little bit easier. And then like before, we have this critical damage bonus branch here, again really useful for our Nebulok set. And then we have like an attack damage but also ailments branch down here, and we're getting a bunch of like we get increased duration of damaging ailments on enemies and magnitude of ailments at the cost of a little bit of attack speed. So you could argue that that's not worth it, but I think it is, because the ignites are just dealing so much work, or doing so much more work with these 3 nodes here. So it just felt like a fair investment for 3 passive skill tree points. And obviously we throw a 1 point over here for the jewel socket since we're in range. And then obviously we grab Avatar Fire since this is an Avatar Fire build, and we want this, for obvious reasons. We're going to inflict all fire damage for bigger ignites, take advantage of the the fire damage and elemental damage rolls on gear, and that's basically why we go Avatar Fire. It just feels really fun, and thematically I just love it. You know, I just love being a fire infused tank that's dealing all fire damage, even though I'm like a melee build. Then we have this weapon set 2 branch here. The fire penetration is not useful to us, but these two are for more increased ignite magnitude. And then this notable up here, more flammability magnitude, which is kind of like ignite chance, but then we get the 40% increased damage with hits against ignited enemies. Honestly, if I had the From Nothing diamond that lets you allocate things in range of resonance, these 4 would probably go over there for more critical damage bonus. But you know, these are here for now and they're doing plenty of work. And again, honestly, I almost feel like I don't need that extra damage at this point because pinnacle bosses are dying so quickly. So I may not even need to spend that 90 div for that From Nothing diamond just to get a little extra damage. And over here we have this tiny branch set to weapon set 1 to this notable, which makes our war cries have a minimum of 10 power. And this is really good utility for the build, and this is the one that lets us gain rage when there are no enemies around, since we always have a minimum of 10 power, and they are socketed in a way with Raging Cry, Raging Cry to give us that rage gen. So we basically we can get 16 rage if we use Fortifying Cry and Infernal Cry, and then we have those stocked up and powered attacks ready to go. You don't even need enemies around you to do that. And the rest is super familiar. Honestly, we path to the greatest defense so that we're getting increased attack damage per armor on our shield. And this is actually a lot better as of the most recent update, or just this league, because they upped the average armor rating on pretty much all the shields of the game. So you're getting a lot more value out of this. If you're a shield build using a high armor shield, you should take this every time, in my opinion. And then we path up here for the jewel socket. We grab blood magic so we don't need to use mana anymore. And then we've converted a lot of these passive skill tree points into weapon set 2 points, because this branch, we only need this branch here, which is critical damage bonus for weapon set 2. So that's the reasoning there. I basically freed up these passive skill tree points to be placed elsewhere, since we only need weapon set 2 stuff over here. And real quick, let's go over jewel choices. So I'll basically start by saying that rubies with maximum fire resistance are going to be your go-to. Yeah, that against the darkness diamond is doing a lot of work for us in that regard, but we still need some maximum fire resistance elsewhere so to hit that 90%. So rubies are a great way to do this. Grab that roll with an offensive roll, like increased damage with empowered attacks like we see here, and then whatever you prefer from there. Maybe life regen like on this gem, melee damage. I got lucky with the corrupt here and got 10% increased fire damage, so this is a really good version of that ruby. But yeah, that's basically what you're looking for, to hit hit that 90% maximum elemental resistance cap, but also get some like damage and some utility where you can. And last is this Heart of the Well diamond with a bit of everything I could want, honestly. Gain damage as fire damage, critical damage bonus, maximum fire resistance, and attack speed while rare or uniques are in your presence. Honestly, such a strong collection of rolls on this thing for super cheap too. I've seen these going for anywhere between 30 exalted to 1 div, so keep an eye out if you end up running this build, because these are very useful for it. And hey, that's basically the passive skill tree. I've already said this twice, but if you want a more static reference or the in-game version of this build guide, check out that Mobalytics link below at the description box. But let's move on to the last part of the video here, which is the gear. And there's a bit to discuss and perhaps a little to complain about here. All right, we'll start again with a mouse over. So overall, you notice a lot of improvements from the previous update of the build, a combination of just better items, but also some new uniques like the Sacred Flame and Constricting Command, in addition to prioritizing some maximum fire resistance where we can on the pieces that can roll it. We'll start with the most important piece of the shield build first, which is the shield. Who could have seen that coming, right? So basically, it's a similar story to last time. You either want to buy or craft a shield with the highest armor rating you can find. This is a pretty strong one, even with just 1 socket. Could get this even higher to like 2k or 2.1k if you have more currency to fork over. But I want to point out some of the important rolls that we want here. I've mentioned this before, but the additional flat % physical damage reduction that's just added on to your existing physical damage reduction is a very useful roll. Try to get that on any shield that you use. However, what's now very important to this build is maximum fire resistance. Should be clear by now why we want that, but shields can roll up to 3% maximum fire resistance, which is really nice. It can help you to hit that 90% maximum we're shooting for. So it's a big part of the shield to keep in mind on this build. So try to get a good maximum fire resist roll on your shield if you can afford it. Oh, and obviously socket your shield with perfect iron runes if you can, as well as cranking up the armor value past 20% with the ball armorer infusers. But next we have constricting command. So we basically sacrifice a bit of the defensive stats in our helmet slot for the surrounded effect here. This lets us require fewer enemies to be considered surrounded, and with this, the 4 fewer enemies required roll means that we only need 1 enemy to be considered surrounded and activate all of those useful passive skill tree nodes. And this can roll higher, but after the nerf, I think by definition at this point, you cannot roll lower than 1 enemy to be considered surrounded. So really, there's no difference between the 4 fewer and 5 fewer enemies roll on this item. And honestly, I just socketed from pure AoE. We have 2 bear idols in here, and they were slightly buffed and with the league update to be 10% AoE instead of 8%. So you know, you could probably replace one of these with a more unique socket or that soul core that increases your maximum rage if you want. There is definitely some flexibility here, but I just wanted some extra support while clearing since my damage is feeling more than fine at the moment. All right, and then we have this interesting addition, Sacred Flame. I think I touched upon this earlier, but basically the allies rolls on this item are useless to us. We don't really care about that. However, all of the other rolls on this are either super useful or pretty relevant. We have Purity of Fire here. I don't really care about qualifying for the higher level versions here. I think you need like more intelligence or something like that. But this basically just grants you extra fire resistance while you're wielding it, and more fire resistance at those higher levels. That's perfectly fine, kind of nice for the build, but not like necessary or anything, unless you want to rely on it to cap off your resistances or something. I don't know if I'd recommend that though, because we are weapon swapping quite a bit while clearing. The gain 54% of damage as extra fire damage is really nice actually. I don't think it's quite as strong as a mace with +4 melee skill and an elemental damage attacks roll, but we don't really need that anymore anyway since we are using Nebulock for a shield wall clearing now. But this last line here is the one that's most interesting. It reads, enemies in our presence resist elemental damage based on their lowest resistance. This is awesome. We basically no longer need Fire Penetration 2, as I said earlier, when using this thing, as enemies will only resist your damage based on their weakest elemental resistance. This means that if a gold tier fire resist mob has like a low gray tier frost resist mod on them, they will resist your fire damage using that crappy frost resistance, which is great because you can bypass all the damage reduction gold tier fire resist enemies would normally benefit from against this build. 2 things here. I'm not sure if this means that if something has, let's say, negative frost resist and gold tier fire resist, if that means you are now dealing more damage with fire damage against them. That's something I have to test a bit more, but it seems like it would work that way, but I have a slight issue with the wording here regardless. So according to this, they resist elemental damage based on their lowest resistance. Not elemental damage from attacks, not elemental damage from hits. All elemental damage, it would seem. However, I noticed that this does not provide us a benefit when igniting fire-resistant enemies. Like if this was working with the way the wording implies here, you should be able to inflict a hardcore ignite on a fire-resistant enemy or boss, and if you move them out of your presence, they start resisting the ignite damage, and then if you move them back into your presence, they should start taking more damage from the ignite since they should only be resisting it based on their lowest elemental resistance like the Scepter states. However, that's not how this works. It just only affects hit damage, kind of like Fire Penetration 2, honestly, which I don't agree with. The wording here implies all elemental damage, so it would be cool if GGG could, you know, either clear this up or make it work as intended. Anyways, let's go over the sockets real quick. I think these are pretty ideal, honestly, for the setup here. We're already getting a whopping 100 spirit from this thing, which is great. This means we can have Berserk active in both weapon sets a lot easier for a bigger damage boost, as well as just other kind of just general spirit flexibility. But we can socket it here with the Rabbit Idol for even more spirit. So this is just helping us even more in that regard. And then we have the 50% increased presence area of effect, which is a really nice one. So this will apply to that elemental damage effect to targets in a wider area, even though it's just elemental hit damage as we just mentioned, but that's okay. Kind of optional as they are around 2 div, but I got lucky when finding this Fox Idol, so I just slapped it in there because it made the most sense to me. Especially since almost all the other socket options for scepters have to do with like minions or allies, etc. Anyways, moving on to Nebulock. So this is the weapon that allows our shield walls to crit every time we detonate them, as long as we have an endurance charge to consume to do so. And as we've gone over, we have plenty of ways to generate endurance charges, so you should basically be critting with them like 90% of the time, if not 100. What's nice is that the downside, take 100 chaos damage per second per endurance charge, is kind of a non-factor since we switch back to weapon set 1 to detonate our shield walls that we create with this thing. And those shield walls still crit, so it feels kind of nice being able to realize the benefits of this thing without any of the downsides in that way. And we're also Smith of Kitava, so that chaos damage can become even less of a factor if you do end up putting that point in the reduced chaos damage based on your armor node. But I mean, that's all there is to it, really. Try to get a double socket at minimum at this point, and I just socket it in a way to help us deal more damage against rare or unique enemies, and for more skill speed. Should be obvious why we want this one. This will help us slam down those walls a little bit faster. Let's go over the amulet next. I got this one recently. It's not the best base type, to be honest, and the spell damage is useless to us, but the rest of this amulet feels amazing to me. I got percent increased max life, +3 to melee, fire resistance, chaos resistance, more max life, etc. This is a very tanky amulet. You could go for a more aggressive one with like crit damage bonus and all that, but I basically needed to cap off resistances here and wanted some extra tankiness, so I opted for this one. And we already talked about the anoint in the previous section, so we're going to move on to the chest piece for now. This is an ornate plate with 4 sockets, max quality, and is rune forged before corrupting it. Although I did not use Vol armor infusers here, so that's one thing I forgot that you could probably improve upon before it gets corrupted. But yeah, this is close to best in slot for a Smith of Kitava using Smith's Masterwork, since we have the highest roll of 2.5% maximum life regen here. And I think that's where you could potentially run into some priciness. Like the 3 socket ornate plate that's non-corrupted is around 10 exalted, which is super cheap, but that's only if you low roll the implicit regen. I don't think you should low roll the regen, honestly. You should opt for the higher rolls. And at like 2.4 and above, you start seeing like 1 div to 5 div costs here. That's honestly not too bad, but I got lucky with the 4 socket here, which I do think helps so much and is something you should try to get here. Things will start to get very pricey if you want the maximum life regen implicit, as well as an already corrupted 4 socket chest piece. So just keep that in mind. I would just fish for like the 4 socket by getting 3 sockets and then corrupting them yourself in some way. So using the 5-ish to 9-ish div bases until you hit it. But yeah, we basically socketed this with 4 perfect body runes, which do more work than Soul Cores of Jaquani at this point. A Discord member of mine actually pointed this out to me, so thank you for that. And there's likely some flexibility here with the sockets, to be honest. You could go with whatever you want, but I just wanted some extra tankiness, so I went with pure max life here. Last thing I'll go into a little bit of depth about is the belt. Basically, the important thing here is to get a corrupted belt that grants you maximum fire resistance. Yes, belts can roll it too on corruption, and that's the one thing I'd recommend here, in addition to life and the other resistances that you need. Prices were honestly all over the place last time I checked for things like this, so the only advice I can offer you here is to grab what you can get, try to get the 2 charm slots minimum. Again, whatever defensives you can manage, but most importantly is that maximum fire resistance. It helps out a lot here, so I would prioritize that. Then we have business as usual elsewhere. Gloves are pretty straightforward with the +2 all melee, life, accuracy if you can. Accuracy, again, is quite important since we are covering a large AoE with this build, and crit damage bonus for sure. You can technically roll attack speed on gloves as well, but you are looking at some insane prices with the previous rolls in mind, so grab it if you can, but it's not the end of the world if you don't, since we get so much of it elsewhere. And on that note, obviously, we socket with the rune that gives you more attack speed, so that's honestly really useful that is an option here. Then we have boots, also straightforward. Get a high move speed roll, whatever resistances you need, maximum life, etc. I find that pure armor boots are not as important here, since we're hitting those max resistances and then converting 25% of physical damage taken as fire damage, hence the evasion and armor hybrid boots here. I just found that this had some good rolls on it, aside from the attributes requirements one, obviously, but I also didn't hit the double corrupt, so I could look for an upgrade here. But it's important to socket this with either movement speed or this one, which is called the Idol of Oak, for more endurance charge generation. This will give you a 15% extra chance to generate an extra endurance charge when generating them in general. It's kind of low, but with how often we are generating them, I do think this does make a difference. Again, feel free to experiment here, though this is what I'm going to be using. All right, then we have breach rings. Honestly, just try to get increased fire damage, flat fire damage, accuracy, fire resistance, and then throw in Zoph's Catalyst to make all the fire stuff even better, you know. And that's pretty much, those are like the most important roles here. Obviously, I got increased cast speed, which is useless on this one, but we also got an interesting Desecrate, which increases the magnitudes of our ignites if we've consumed an endurance charge recently, which is honestly perfect for this build. I kind of wish I had this on the other ring as well, so it might be something I fish for in the future. But again, we're dealing so much damage and killing bosses so quickly anyway that it seems unnecessary. And then for charms, you don't need anything that deals with damaging ailments. You don't need the ignite charm or the poison charms or anything like that, since we're immune to that damage anyway. I would recommend getting the thawing charm so that you can absorb or, you know, avoid being frozen. The fall of the axe charm, these aren't too expensive anymore, but onslaught is really useful, and there are a lot of slows being thrown around when you're clearing, so this will just grant you onslaught and just increases your attack speed and move speed. Feels really good. And then rite of passage, this is totally optional. I just found this recently and I was like, I'm going to slap this on here. So this is kind of like a flex spot. Rite of passage with the ox, the spirit of the ox thing here is fine. I'm just using it for now because why not? And that's the build, guys. I know that this is substantially different from the previous version of the build, but it is still same in many ways. It's just the clearing that is just so much more improved now. It feels really good, and the bossing is even better, even though we're basically using the same skills for that too. Anyways, that's going to be it for this one. Please keep an eye out for more videos. I got a couple more ideas on the way. I want to update the Spear and Shield Bleed Titan, which is, I know it's long overdue, but it's just a time thing, so I'm going to get to it when I can. And then I have a Warbringer build that I want to play around with that I will likely make a build video on as well as a couple of shorter, smaller video ideas I plan on cranking out here and there. But that's going to be it for this one, guys. I will see you next time.